It's been a while, and we've done a ton of different videos since we've delved deep into the dungeons of Fear and Hunger. We've done creepy books, creepy games, creepy anime, and yes, even the squirrel stapler. But like in the game itself, you can never really escape the dungeons of Fear and Hunger. And speaking of the dungeons of Fear and Hunger, that is our exact topic today. We've done some lore location videos like this before, like with Mahabra and Prahival, but we actually never covered the namesake of the series itself, the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. In the far past, the old gods were more widely worshipped than the new ones. Eventually, humanity's greed was left unchecked for too long, and they took the city built for the gods, Mahabra, and used it for their own greed and power. They would sit on the golden throne and ascend to godhood themselves. But this isn't a video on Mahabra, and I actually already did a video on Mahabra, and this is not a video about that. More and more humans sat on the golden throne of Mahabra and became new gods. Although this wouldn't solve humanity's lust for greed, as once a new god loses influence, it is said they also lose their power altogether, and then they are ordained to the Grand Hall, where all the new gods sit for eternity. The Fellowship, a group of humans who would journey and become new gods themselves in the year of 809, went through a Tomb of the Gods which guarded the city of Mahabra. A tomb that supposedly held the remains of several gods, most notable being Alll-Merr, the Ascended One. After getting through this dungeon, the Fellowship would become new gods themselves. Them sitting on the throne and becoming new gods would slightly and indirectly influence several empires from the shadows and as a new world order. This would indirectly affect the already established kingdom of Rondon and Uldragard. Eventually, though, through some means, the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger were established in the country of Rondon. Whether that was through the new god's influence in the shadows or through the kingdom's own volition is unknown. But my headcanon is that the new gods influenced Rondon's kings to build this dungeon hundreds of years ago to make sure no unworthy human could take the golden throne again, or perhaps make sure that no human could ever take the throne again, as a sort of extra measure to guard Mahabra. As we see in the 16th century in the first Fear and Hunger game, Francois the Dominating One and Nostramus, who were two of the men in 809, have realized that the new godhood isn't the thing that people think it is. It doesn't grant enlightenment or solve any of humanity's problems. In addition to that, Nashra, another new god from before the expedition in 809, also believes this to be the case. That new godhood isn't the answer to all of humanity's problems. So it stands to reason that they would help cover up Mahabra with this horrible dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Well, you may ask what the Kingdom of Rondon covered up this Tomb of the Giants and the city of Mahabra with. Well, the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. A dungeon that Rondon made sure that no one would ever make it back to the Golden Throne again, by creating the absolute worst humanity ever had to offer and put it in this dungeon. In this dungeon, there are prisons, mines for prisoners to work in, as well as several amenities for guards and workers to sleep and eat in. Although, it would not matter, as the guards are little better than the prisoners themselves. Guards are known to rape and kill prisoners without a second thought. Prisoners would die so frequently that a lot of the prison cells have never even been used. In addition to all of that, several other horrible things would appear in the dungeons over the years, such as a group of cave dwellers who openly worshipped the god of the depths, who is the god of those who are forgotten and hated, as well as bugs. But somehow, the god of the depths physically manifested in these dungeons where the cave dwellers worshipped it, in the mines specifically. This would have disastrous consequences for the dungeon itself. Due to the now new presence of the god of the depths, the dungeon would become, for lack of a better term, cursed. And the fact that the dungeons were already horrible did not help that fact. The dungeon would corrupt anyone who walked into it. It didn't matter how sane or strong or hardy they were. No matter what happened, they could actually never escape the dungeon. Even if they physically left the dungeon, their mind would always be there, till eventually the people who did escape wouldn't be able to tell the difference between their waking nightmares of the dungeon and reality itself. And those were the lucky ones. The guards and others who stayed for an extended period of time in the dungeons would transform into horrible monsters in both body and mind. The worst of which would be Captain Rudimer, a captain from the 16th century from the Kingdom of Rondon. who would stay in this dungeon so long that he would transform into the infamous Gro-Mauler, who I made a video on if you want to see his story right here. But know that he was once a very virtuous and good captain, and due to his stay in this dungeon, it turned him into the worst thing imaginable. Eventually, a woman would enter the picture and somehow become wed to the god of the depths, in some way. In addition to this, the cave dwellers would come into possession of the Cube of the Depths, an artifact of the god himself. These two factors, and the fact that the dungeon was already now in tune with the god of the depths physically, merged the dungeon, the wife of the god of the depths, and the god of the depths himself into one being. So in a way, the dungeons are alive. All of these factors eventually gave this dungeon a less than stellar reputation. And by that, I mean it is literally considered to be the worst place on Earth. So bad that literally all countries and kingdoms in the first game pretty much know of this kingdom's reputation, even in the northern country of Uldragard. In the mid-16th century, one of the Fellowship New Gods, Nilvian the Endless One, would find out about a man of prophecy named Lagard, a seemingly beautiful and charismatic leader of an army that has never lost. Nilvian visited Lagard in his dreams, and using her magical goddess powers, conceived a child in this dream, one with no name. You see, Nilvian had a plan with this child. Give birth to this child in the cursed Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, a place utterly devoid of hope, and show all of humanity's worst qualities, and have this child live here for about a decade without ever leaving. Who knows what horrible things this child has been through, but this girl eventually did grow to be about 10 years old this way. And coincidentally, in the year of 1590, Lagard, the man of prophecy, would be imprisoned in the very same dungeon that his unknown daughter was growing up in. After a short time later, 4 adventurers would also enter this dungeon, each looking for Lagard for their own reasons, in the year of 1590. These adventurers would do several things in this dungeon during the events of the first Fear and Hunger game. 1. Put an end to the Gro-Mauler, or at the very least, a Gro-Mauler. 2. Discover a moonless hound and tame it and have it passed down through the generations of Ragnvaldr, who was one of those 4 adventurers. 3. Deliver the girl who is the daughter of Nilvian and Lagard to the very abyss at the center of the God of the Depths, creating a new god, the God of Fear and Hunger, one that pushed humanity out of the Dark Ages and established new religions. 4. Found the traces of the old god Gro-Goroth and got a former new god Nashra to be burned to nearly to death by these traces of the old god and buried beneath the rubble of the dungeon. 5. Helped a, probably, revived Lagard to ascend to new godhood and establish a new empire. And finally, 6. Helped Enki, another one of the 4 adventurers, become enlightened. This ends the lore of the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger from the first game of Fear and Hunger. But what about in between the 2 games, and what about the second Fear and Hunger game? Well, there isn't as much lore on those 2 things, but let's get through that. The first thing that happened is the dungeon itself collapsed pretty much. So much so that it became a ruin more than a dungeon. Closer to the events of the second game, though, a contestant of the Termina festival, Ossa, was born in the country of Abyssinia in the year of 1909, and in the efforts for power and enlightenment, met a wizard by the name of Hadil Azif, who prepared an expedition to the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger sometime in the late 1930s or early 1940s. As this expedition neared the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, more and more of the expedition would be plagued by nightmares, no doubt due to the cursed nature of this dungeon. Eventually, only a few adventurers would remain, which included Ossa, who would nearly die several times in the process of going through the rubble of the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger. However, doing so, he would find the head of Nashra, the new god who was burned and buried by the traces of Gro-Goroth. Nashra would guide Ossa to Prehevel, where a new Termina festival was taking place. Also during this little excursion to the dungeons, Ossa would find and kill another different Gro-Mauler. In Prehevel, the location of the second game, you can also find the Sabbath Sword in the rafters of the Church of Alll-Merr, a supposed treasure from the Dungeons of Fear and Hunger due to Kahara, another one of those 4 adventurers from the first game's S ending, which shows this as a treasure from the dungeon. However, because we don't know the canon endings to Fear and Hunger 2, this is where the tale of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger ends for now. So, until the next update, which as I have been saying for the past year, when that update does come out, I will stream it. So, until the next video, whether that is another disturbing book, disturbing game, or another Fear and Hunger lore video, I will see you next time, and I love you all.